All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Get ready to jump into some really foundational thinking today. We're looking at how organizations can actually make technology work for them.
Yeah.
Not just as a cost center, but really driving value while keeping a handle on the risks involved. Today, we're digging into excerpts from a pretty well-regarded framework document. It's focused specifically on INT governance and management. Think of it like a comprehensive playbook, maybe. Our mission really is to unpack the first couple of core chapters, Chapter 1 and Chapter 3. We want to help you get a solid grasp of the fundamental structure, the absolute building blocks this system uses.
Exactly. And understanding that structure is, well, it's crucial. It's like having the map before you start the journey, isn't it?
Right.
Frameworks like this, they're not just theory. They really aim to give organizations a common language and, a systematic way to tackle something as complex as enterprise-wide information and technology.
Right. That structure helps you see the bigger picture, how all the different pieces are meant to fit together. So our plan is to guide you through the key concepts in these initial chapters. We'll start with Chapter 1, get those core definitions down, especially that big distinction. Then we'll move into Chapter 3. That's where we see how the framework organizes all the detailed guidance for achieving its objectives. By the end, you should have a pretty clear picture of this foundational approach. Okay, so let's unpack this, kicking off with Chapter 1, and what it tells us about that crucial difference between governance and management.
Yeah, this distinction is absolutely fundamental to the framework. It clearly separates what needs to be achieved from how it gets done. So governance, that's typically the job of the board of directors or, a similar governing body. Their role is focused on evaluating stakeholder needs, setting the overall direction, and then monitoring. Monitoring performance and compliance. It's the what and the checking.
Okay, the what and the checking. I like that.
Management, though, that falls to executive management, usually led by the CEO. Their job is to, plan, build, run, and monitor all the activities needed to actually follow the directions set by governance. They're responsible for the how. So governance sets the compass.
And management does the navigating.
Precisely. Management plots the course and sails the ship, making sure it stays aligned.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like the board decides we need to get to that island and don't sink the boat.
Yeah, basically.
While management figures out the exact route, checks the weather, manages the crew, actually sails the boat.
Right.
And the framework gives us a visual for this, right? There's often a core model diagram.
Yes, exactly. Figure 1.2 in the source material shows this core model. It outlines 5 key areas or domains where all the INT activities happen.
Sort of domains, okay.
Right, and they neatly map to that governance versus management split. There's one domain specifically for governance activities, and then 4 domains covering the management activities.
Got it. So what are they called?
The governance domain is evaluate, direct, and monitor, or EDM for short. This is where the governing body, typically the board, makes sure enterprise objectives are achieved. They evaluate strategic options, direct the key decisions, and monitor the outcomes.
Okay, EDM, board level stuff.
Right. Then the 4 management domains cover the doing. There's align, plan, and organize, or APO. That's strategy, planning, architecture. Then build, acquire, and implement BAI. That's about creating or acquiring solutions and getting them deployed. After that comes deliver, service, and support, DSS. This is the day-to-day running of IT, operations, service desk, that kind of thing.
The engine room.
Kind of, yeah. And finally, monitor, evaluate, and assess, MEA. This is about performance management, internal control, compliance assessment within management's scope.
Okay, so APO, BAI, DSS, MEA for management.
That's it. And these 4 are generally the responsibility of senior and middle management.
So the framework structures all its guidance around these 5 areas, EDM for governance, the other 4 for management. And a core principle you mentioned from the source is that any objective, something the organization needs to achieve with INT, it always relates to a specific process within one of these domains.
Yes, exactly. And crucially, achieving that objective doesn't just depend on the process alone. It relies on what the framework calls components of the governance system. Chapter 1 introduces this idea. Achieving those objectives needs a whole system. It needs factors working together.
Yeah.
Things like organizational structures, information flows, the right culture, skills, policies.
Oh, okay, so it's not just do this process.
None at all. It's do this process supported by the right people, structure, information, culture, policies, and tech. You need to establish, tailor, and sustain all these components to make the governance system work and actually hit those INT objectives.
It really sounds like the framework sees getting value from IT and managing risk as a Well, a socio-technical challenge. It's not just about the wires and boxes.
Absolutely. People, structure, culture, just as important as the technology itself. Maybe more so sometimes.
So maybe take a second. You listening. Think about that difference, governance versus management. Where you work, who sets the direction? Who does the day-to-day? How clear is that line? Okay, now it gets really interesting, I think. Chapter 3. This takes those ideas, objectives, processes, components, and it lays out how the framework actually provides the detailed guidance for all its objectives. There are around 40 of them, right?
Roughly, yes. Chapter 3 explains the structure of that guidance. It shows you, for any given objective, what kind of supporting information you'll find and how it's organized.
It's like the blueprint for the detailed descriptions that come later in the full framework document.
Exactly. It uses figures like 3.1 through 3.12 in the source to illustrate the different pieces of guidance provided for each objective.
And it starts by connecting these INT objectives back to the bigger picture, right? Like, why are we even doing this?
Yes. It shows how achieving a specific INT objective helps the organization meet its higher-level goals. It talks about enterprise goals, EGs, and alignment goals, AGs, which are more INT-focused but still support the enterprise.
Can you give some examples? What kind of goals are we talking about?
Sure. The source lists things like, for enterprise goals, maybe EG07, quality of management information, or EG10, staff skills, motivation, and productivity. Even EG13, product and business innovation.
Okay, real business outcomes.
Right. And for alignment goals, things like AG01, INT compliance and support for business compliance, very critical, or AG07, security of information, processing infrastructure and applications, and privacy. Also, AG12, competent and motivated staff, specifically for INT.
And it provides metrics, too, to measure these.
Yeah, figure 3.3 mentions example metrics, so it helps you track if you're actually making progress on those important goals.
So that gives you the why, how this INT objective links up. Then it gets into the how and what, detailing guidance for each component we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. For each objective, it breaks down the guidance per component.
Let's walk through those. What's first?
First, and probably the most detailed, is the process itself. Each objective is linked to one main process, and the guidance details the specific management or governance practices within that process, then the activities within those practices. It even mentions capability levels for activities like how well should this be performed? Is it level 2, 3, 4, or 5 maturity?
So really granular detail on this.
Yes. Examples of practices might be APO 1.05, establish roles and responsibilities, or maybe BAI 03.08, execute solution testing. Or in operations DSS 02.02, record, classify, and prioritize requests and incidents. It lays out the activities involved.
Okay, that's the core activity. The processes need people and structure, like you said.
Right, so the next component is organizational structures. This part details the relevant roles and structural elements. Think board, CEO, CIO, CTO, the usual suspects, but also maybe an INT governance board, steering committees, project managers, a PMO, maybe a dedicated data management function.
Lots of potential roles.
Indeed. And the framework notes that the names might differ across companies, but the functions these structures perform are what matters.
Makes sense. What comes after structure?
Information flows and items. This is super important. It highlights the inputs needed for a process or practice and the outputs it produces. It shows how information moves. An output from one process might be a crucial input for another.
Like dependencies.
Exactly. Figure 3.7 shows how info flows between processes, and 3.8 how outputs can feed multiple places. Examples listed are things like an approved resources plan or risk analysis results. It shows how things are connected.
And information needs people to understand and use it.
Absolutely. Which brings us to people, skills, and competencies. This focuses on the human element. It lists the specific skills and expertise needed to execute the process and achieve the objective. The source mentions examples like financial management skills, data analysis, business change management. It really underscores that you need competent staff. It's non-negotiable.
Okay, people and skills. Then what?
Then we get to principles, policies, and procedures. This covers the formal documented guidance, the rules of the road, the established ways of working, things like architectural principles, maybe formal budgeting policy, a crucial privacy policy.
The official guidelines.
Right. And often this section might reference related external guidance too, like industry standards or regulations.
This next one feels really important and sometimes maybe a bit fuzzy. Culture, ethics, and behavior.
Ah, yes. Crucial, and as you say, sometimes overlooked or harder to pin down, but the framework tackles it. This component details the desired cultural elements, What kind of environment supports this objective? Maybe it's promoting an INT risk-aware culture, or ensuring transparency on budgets, or building an ecosystem of trusted vendors, or really importantly, fostering zero tolerance for unethical behavior or non-compliance.
And leadership plays a big role here, I imagine.
Huge. The source notes that senior management setting the tone is key. You can write policies all day, but culture often dictates what actually happens.
Very true. Okay, almost there. What's the last component?
The last one listed is services, infrastructure, and applications. This is the technology layer. It details the specific IT services, the underlying infrastructure networks, servers, cloud platforms, and the applications that are relevant to achieving the objective. Basically, the tech resources needed to support everything else we've talked about.
Got it. So Chapter 3 essentially provides this detailed template. For every single objective, it tells you, here's the process, here are the goals it supports, here are the structures, the info flows, the skills, the policies, the culture, and the tech involved.
Exactly. It's a really holistic, multifaceted view for each objective.
Wow, okay. That really paints a picture of how comprehensive this framework aims to be. So let's quickly recap then. We've journeyed through Chapter 1 and 3. We started with that key split, governance, the board setting direction and monitoring versus management executives planning, building, running, monitoring the how.
The what versus the how.
Then we looked at the 5 domains in the core model. EDM for governance, APO, BAI, DSS, MEA for management.
Covering the full scope of INT activities.
We understood there are specific objectives within those domains, around 40 or so. And then Chapter 3 showed us the structure, how each of those objectives is broken down with detailed guidance across all those different components.
Processes, goals, organizational structures, information, people and skills, policies, culture, and finally, the services and tech.
Yeah, it provides that complete framework for thinking about all the different angles you need to cover for effective INT governance and management. It's not just one thing. It really shows the interconnectedness of it all. Well, we really appreciate you joining us for this deep dive into the foundational structure of this INT governance framework. Hope it was useful. And as you reflect on everything we've discussed, how achieving those INT objectives really depends on getting all these pieces right. The process, the people, the culture, the tech, the policies. Here's a final thought for you to consider. Which one of those components, people, process, policy, culture, tech, etc., which one do you suspect is the most frequently underestimated or maybe overlooked in organizations today? And what do you think the consequences are when that happens? Something to mull over.
Definitely something to think about. Until next time.
See you soon.